Okay, the next topic that we'll cover is constructor. Okay, constructor is, well, actually a method, right? But it's a special kind of method that defines how you create an object, all right? And constructor is always used with the new command to reserve space in your machine's memory for the object, okay? And, well, it must have the same name as your class, all right? And it's used to initialize all the object variables, or we call them instance variables, okay? Right? And constructor can have parameter or can have argument, but you do not return any value, all right? And for constructor, you do not even write void, okay? You left the return value out from constructor definition, okay? And you can have more than one constructors in the same class, all right? And each one of those constructor overload with others, okay? For example, let's see class simple dice 2, okay? In class simple dice 2, we have two constructors. The one that doesn't have parameter, right here, and the one that has one parameter, right? For the one that doesn't have, the face value of the dice is determined by rolling the dice. But for the one with a parameter, the face value is set according to that parameter, okay? All right. From the example here, you actually see the keyword this. All right. This is used to distinguish between the local variable of the constructor and the face value variable of the object. All right. Because you can use the same name. All right. And many auto-generate code will use the same name. All right. So you need this dot face value. All right. This will mean the face value of this object. All right. But face value here is the local variable of the method. All right. So you use this keyword to distinguish between them. All right. Okay. Let's see if there are anything else we need to know. All right. Keyword this or dimension. All right. And well, from the code in the last page. All right. From the code in the last page. Same code. Right. In this version, this keyword is used to identify the correct object variable. All right. And well, but when we write constructor ourselves, we don't need to write like this. We can alternatively just write the constructor with different variable name for the method argument. All right. If we write different name for method argument, then we do not need this to distinguish because they have different names. So for this case, if you refer to face value, it will mean the face value property of the object. All right, face value of the dice. All right, because there's only one that it can refer to. Okay. Why? Okay, let's carry on. Okay, again. This is the one that we see in Simple Dice 2. Okay? And we can actually make this code a bit shorter. Alright? By using keyword this as a way of, in this case, this means constructor. Alright? So this is calling a constructor of the same class, but with parameter. Okay? So it's actually called this one. Alright? With the value being the number of the dice roll. Okay? So you will see this, I think, quite a bit. Alright? When a constructor actually calls another constructor. Alright, so this one actually calls this one. Alright, and it all use keyword this. Alright, you can't call constructor using something like you can't do it here. Alright? Inside a constructor, if you want to call another constructor, you cannot just write the constructor name. Alright? By syntax, you have to use the keyword this. Okay? Okay? And also, with keyword static, we know keyword static that it means anything that is static is shared. Alright? But it's not limited to data or limited to the fields within the class. Alright? Methods can be static. Alright? And class can be static too. Alright? So, static methods means that method can be called from using the class name. Alright? Because it's shared amongst all the objects of that class. Right? So static methods can be called from the object name and the class name. Very similar to variables. Alright? So, in the example here, we have this one we have looked at before, right? And this one we have seen in previous video, but at the time I didn't know what it means. Alright? So it actually means it's an example from class math, where you can access the variable pi. That is a static variable defined in class math. Alright, so you can access it right away without having to new math object. Alright? And the same goes for method random and method floor. You don't need to create an object to be able to call the methods. Alright? You can call these methods from class math right away. They are defined as static methods. Okay? Right. So, and final, now we've seen that a final variable means a variable that can only be assigned once. Alright? But not only does final apply to data. Alright? The final keyword can be applied to method and class as well. Alright? So for final method. It means the method cannot be overridden by methods of the subclass. Alright? That means, well, from the example that we've seen so far, from example of class animal, alright? If I define speak in class animal to be final, then other classes like cat cannot write method speak. Alright? So it's useful in some cases. Alright? But not in the uses that we do in our class. Okay? So final method cannot be overridden by subclasses. Alright? And final class cannot be inherited. Okay? If you don't want your class to be extended by other classes, then you should define your class to be final. Alright? So, but again, this, well, can be useful in some instances of use, but not in our class. Okay? Right. And for a constant value, it's usually defined final static or static final. Right, the same thing. Okay. Right. Okay, let's get to the actual example. Alright, so this is simple dice 2. And you see that there are 2 constructors. Alright? And with this constructor, I can actually change it a bit. Like, I want the face value to be equal to the result of the dice roll. But since I've written a constructor that used some value before, I can just call this constructor to have the result of the dice roll being its argument. So, guess roll. So, can it work this way? Or well, this, and then the result is this dot row. Can you return here? So, in the actual use, let's get back to the slide. The slide say that this row can work, right? But when I actually do the actual call, it doesn't work. Well, it says cannot call before superclass constructor is called. So, is there a superclass? But there's no superclass here. And the method row is right here. So, why doesn't it run? Why doesn't it compile? Let's do this again. So it actually can call, but it needs a super constructor. That's strange. Maybe I can try doing something. Nope. I attempt to call a superclass constructor. Well, a superclass for simple dice 2 should be a common superclass for all objects. That is an object class. Okay, but seems like it doesn't work this way. Oh, it can it cannot work. I know how it cannot work because the method role is not static, right? So in the slide, this is actually wrong. This is actually wrong. You can't use role because role can only be called when an object has finished its creation. Alright? But we are creating the object. We are creating the object now. So it hasn't finished its creation. That's why role cannot be called here. It can only be called when it's finished creation. But during creation doesn't work. So the slide is incorrect. Alright. But it can actually initialize here. Right? But this is only doable because this calling and setting a value is after the initialization. Alright? The initialization is done by the system. And the setting of variable is done after the object has completed its creation. So this is fine, but this is not, since it's calling while the constructor is still being called. Right? While the constructor of this one is being called. So can't do it that way. You must do it this way. Okay? So I have to mark this as wrong. Right. Okay. That's what we get from the example. Alright. And so that should be, I think that covers the topic for this video. Alright. So we'll see each other again in the next video.